there's no God. Agnosticism says there's no way we have enough information. We're not sure. We can't be sure that there's a God, but we doubt it. So it's definitely based on that. And so they're not identical, humanism and atheism, but it's humanism based on atheism. That's the first thing to recognize. Secondly, notice the claim is still made that we can lead ethical lives, we can do actions pertaining to the good of humanity and that sort of thing. And we'll notice both of these points more as we go through several different quotes here. But the idea is, and the defense of this philosophy is, we're still good people. We can still be ethical. We can still live good lives, meaningful lives. We just don't have to have God to be a part of that. And we'll notice that again and again as a theme as we go through these quotes. The rest of these quotes are from the Humanist International website. So that's why they spell a few of these words different and everything. So this is the worldwide organization and their explanation of their worldview. A humanist is someone who recognizes that we human beings are the most curious and the most capable curators of knowledge in the known universe. To gain knowledge, we must use our reason and experience to understand the world. And we may create or partake of the great artistic fruits of humankind to enhance our emotional palates, deepen our empathy, and enrich our understanding. But we reject any reliance on blindly received authority or on dogma or what others may claim is divine revelation, because we don't believe we get tip-offs about truth from a supreme being beyond time and space. That would be cheating. All right, so to summarize that, we believe in learning, we believe in enjoying the human experience in a deep and meaningful way. We just deny the notion that any kind of God, any kind of supreme being is a part of all of that. We deny divine revelation, that there's a God out there who has revealed things to us. And so we find meaning in ourselves and in our pursuits and what we find meaning in ourselves or ascribe meaning to ourselves. Here's another quote. There's no reason to believe that meaning has to come from a supreme being. If you can write a sentence on paper which isn't nonsense, then you can create meaning. For a humanist, there is no divine plan or purpose. The humanist recognizes that we make our own purposes, tell our own stories, set our own goals. This gives life meaning. So again, we reject God, but we still believe life has meaning. So it would be very tempting for us to misunderstand and misrepresent what they believe and say, well, there's no meaning to life then. Well, at least we have to recognize they're saying, no, we believe in the meaning of life. We believe there still is a code of ethics that we personally would subscribe to. And we believe there is such a thing as good and evil. It depends on who you're talking to there, but we give life its meaning. That's how they would understand that. We give life its meaning, not God. Now, we'll talk about that more later, but this is what, we're just getting their side of the story. Here's another quote. Part of their website is kind of in a question and answer format, maybe kind of an FAQ sort of deal. Doesn't that mean that you can do whatever you want? Here's how they would answer that. Living a good life is not the same as unrestrained hedonism or living a life of unadulterated pleasure or self-interest. Rather, it may mean living in community, helping others, flourishing at what we're good at, contributing to our global society, and exploring and marveling at the world we find ourselves in. And then here's another one. Is this some sort of human supremism? And they would say, no, humanism puts the human moral agent at the center because we are the only, or at least by far the most sophisticated, moral decision makers that we know of. Now, we could dissect that answer, I think, a little bit and see if it's a good answer to that question, but just notice what they're saying. They're saying there's still meaning, we still believe in ethics and all that sort of stuff. It's just without God. And when they talk about, as far as we know, humans are at the center of this, what they go on to talk about then is animals. We can look at animals and there's a level of intelligence and everything there, but as far as we know, humans are the most advanced as far as all of these moral decision kind of things go. So that gives us at least a bit of an idea of what we're talking about here with humanism. And notice again, a couple of main points. First of all, God does not exist. That's a core of this philosophy. And then secondly, even though God does not exist, that does not mean that we live crazy, unrestrained lives. We see good in helping others, living as community, living by a personal code of ethics, etc. So we're talking about humanism today because it has become very prevalent. It is aggressively being adopted by people all over the world and people in our country. And I would say that the things that trouble you and I about our society and the way things seem to be going can be traced back to some element of humanism. Whether people that believe this way would call themselves humanism or have ever heard the word humanism. It's that idea that I can make my own set of ethics that we're talking about here. And maybe it's not pure humanism. Maybe some people still believe God exists, but they disconnect that from a personal code of ethics. And it ends up being essentially what humanists teach in a practical sense, that I describe and I ascribe meaning to life, and what I say goes, and it's my meaning and our shared meaning that defines good and evil. So we want to talk about that and the roots of that and the base of that God does not exist, in our response to humanism this morning. So let's respond this way. First of all, God does exist. That's the first big problem we got here. They're basing all this on the fact that there is no God who can tell you what to do. I would counter with, there is a God, and He can tell you what to do. God does exist. Look in Romans chapter 1, and let's think about this. We should not assume that God exists just because we want Him to exist. Obviously, everybody in the room here today believes in God, or at least wants God to exist. We have a bias that we need to understand and be honest about. And that's not what makes God exist. Either He exists or He does not. But just because we want Him to exist does not make that so. And from the humanist side, just because you don't want Him to exist does not make it so. We all have to be honest about that and recognize we've probably got some bias coming into this question. Look at Romans chapter 1 at the argument that's being made here. Verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, listen to this, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. All right, let's come back to Romans 1 later, but let's leave off there for a moment. This gives us one of the most basic ways to think about whether or not God exists. You start talking about that question, does God exist? There are a number of arguments to consider. Some are deeper than others, but I think this one is low-hanging fruit. I think we can get this one and we can understand this one. The idea is that design implies a designer. I preached about this back in March of 2019. How do we know God exists? And I talked about this argument. We used this text, and we looked at a number of examples from that. But if we think about it and what verse 20 is saying, we look at what's been made, and that tells you something about an intelligence beyond us that must exist somewhere. Just look around. Look at our own bodies. Look at the planet that we live on. Look through a microscope at the workings of a single cell. Look through a telescope to see the solar system, and the design is evident in all these different places. And design implies a designer. Just like we look at a book. Here's a book about, does God exist? We look at a book, here's words on a page. Here are all these letters that are lined up in just the right way so that they're meaningful. It's not just a jumble of letters, it's arranged into words, and there's spaces between there, there's paragraphs, there's chapters. It's a meaningful arrangement of information. When we see this meaningful arrangement of information, what does that imply? Somebody, some intelligent author somewhere, arranged this information in just that way. We look at the microscope and we discover human DNA. We discover DNA in all living things, but human DNA is an example. In every cell of our bodies is this string of DNA, a 6 billion, with a B, letter code. And it's all got to be in just the right order. If it's not, if there's some things flipped around in there, we have problems with our bodies, with our minds. Something's messed up. Something's wrong there. Something is changed from the way it normally would be. And so here's this code that is in just the right order, 6 billion letters. How did it get there? Well, just like we would infer from the book. An intelligent author arranged this information like that. What do we think about a 6 billion letter code? Does that not imply a designer? That somebody with intelligence beyond us, we didn't do it, but some intelligence beyond us did that? So we look at evidence like that, all of these evidences of design, and in different parts of God's creation, and that implies a design. If you'd like to read more about that, we got some of these tracts in the back. Allie put some extras out this morning, 7 reasons to believe in God. Design implies a designer is one of those reasons. There's 6 others. You can look at that tract, grab one on your way out, take it home and read it. Also look at apologeticspress.org, and you can look at this argument and a number of others for the existence of God. So we can talk about that. That'd be a whole other sermon or series of sermons. But no matter how many times humanists and atheists claim that God does not exist, they're wrong. And their philosophy that's based upon that is wrong. As Tanner read for us earlier, Psalm 14, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. First of all, you've got to deny evidence in order to deny the existence of God. Secondly, in order to reject true faith, which is based on that evidence, you have to blindly accept something else. For example, you've got to accept that life somehow came from non-life, something that has never been observed in the history of science, the history of the universe, and cannot be created in a laboratory or replicated in a laboratory. We've never seen that. You've got to believe it, that somehow naturally life came from non-life. Now, who's got the blind faith? Whose faith rests on evidence, and who has the blind faith in something that's never been observed? And so again, the claim is that from humanist organizations, they claim to be open-minded. Humanist organizations will take on names such as the Free Thinkers Group, and names like that that suggest we are the ones, we're not believing in religion, all that kind of stuff. We're rational. We're the ones who are logical. We're the ones that are being open-minded. We're the free thinkers people, all that kind of stuff. But reality is, they always start with the denial of supernaturalism, as we've been reading from those quotes. Well, think about it. If you start by refusing to weigh the evidence for the very point in question, the results will always be the same, won't they? I tried to think of an illustration to get this across. Here's the best I came up with. Imagine asking, where do fish live? But in your answer, you cannot refer to water. You can't say the word lake, you can't say sea, you can't say ocean, you can't say H2O. You cannot refer to water in any way, shape, or form. Now answer the question, where do fish live? Well, it's going to be hard to get to the truth, isn't it? Okay, now our application. Answer this question, what's the meaning of life? Explain human existence. But you cannot refer to God in any way, shape, or form. You can't refer to the eternal soul. You can't refer to heaven and hell. None of that. You can't refer to any of that spiritual stuff. Now, what's the meaning of life? Well, what if that is the meaning of life? You're eliminating what could possibly be the answer to the question, right? That's not an intellectually honest way to approach anything, is to eliminate one of the possibilities from the get-go. Look in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. The first and biggest problem with humanism is that it's based on an unwillingness to accept the existence of God. Well, what if he does exist? You're not going to get to the truth. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul was fighting this battle 2,000 years ago. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 3, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we're taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Think about the phrases there, especially verse 5. We're destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. Is that humanism? Every lofty thing. These philosophies that are out there, these systems of thinking that are raised up against the knowledge of God. I believe knowledge of God, by the way, verse 5 refers to all the knowledge we have about God, all the revealed will we have about God and what's evident about God. But that would certainly include the existence of God. Paul says, I was fighting that back here, 2 Corinthians 10. And so this is not a new fight. This has been going on for a long time. These philosophies have been here a long time. In fact, you look at the history of humanism, it's kind of at a modern resurgence, but they can trace it back to some ancient philosopher guy who was talking about this stuff several centuries before Christ and first writing down these ideas that now we would call humanism. I'm sure this is going to continue to be popular. Let's just make sure we aren't swayed by their deceptive appeal to false reason. God does exist. Secondly, he is the basis for our morality. Look again in the book of Romans, this time chapter 10. Romans chapter 10. This is not an exact parallel, but let's read the first 3 verses here. Romans 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation, for I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge, for not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. Now, I said it's not an exact parallel because here Paul is talking about his fellow kinsmen, other Jews. They believed in God. Humanists do not believe in God. But the ones he's talking about do believe in God. But still, he says, verse 3, they're not interested in God's righteousness. They want to do their own thing, our own system of righteousness, or our own morality, or however that would be described. Go back to chapter 1, please. The problem is it doesn't work that way. God decides what is moral and what is immoral. God decides how we're going to be saved or not be saved. Good and evil are based on His nature and what He has revealed to us about His will for us. Back in Romans chapter 1, let's pick it up again, verse 22. It said, professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. All right, let's pause the reading again. That's essentially what humanism does, doesn't it? It eliminates God and puts humans in that place. Instead of worshiping God, we're going to worship the Creator, the creature. And the Creator is out of the picture. Let's think deeply about this for a moment. If God doesn't exist, where do morals come from? Okay, so I told the kids this morning, in addition to your face mask, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on for this sermon. Think about that one. If God does not exist, why are there morals? Why do people believe universally in such a thing as good and evil? Why would that evolve? If we're just material, just kind of like a tree is just molecules arranged a certain way. There's no morals with a tree to its fellow tree. You know, there's no moral. How did this come about? If God does not exist, if our existence is purely natural. Billions of years ago, life arose from non-life, and molecules arranged themselves, and we began to evolve, and finally we got to where we are today, and here we are as humans. How do we explain morality? You go anywhere on the planet, to any nation that has ever existed, to any tribe in a jungle somewhere, and any group of people, you'll see the idea of right and wrong. Now, we're going to disagree on the particulars of that, but there's the sense that some things are just wrong. Some things are evil to do. Most, if not all, would agree, for example, most societies would agree that for a man to take a young girl and abuse her in every possible sadistic way possible and kill her, that's an evil thing to do. Why? Who says there's such a thing as right and wrong? What makes that wrong? Versus how, here's a tree, 2 trees growing each other. One grows taller and it blocks the sunlight and the other tree dies. Is that immoral? Well, no, it's just trees. There's no morality among trees, right? But with humans, we have this sense that there's good and evil, that there's right and wrong. Where does that come from? Christians have no problem explaining that. It's from God. God is the basis for our morality. Christians believe morality is based on His nature and what He has revealed about His nature and His will for us. We noticed in the quotes that we read earlier, humanists were adamant that they are good, ethical people. They say, yeah, God's not in the equation, but we still believe in morality. You notice that over and over again. They're saying, we believe in a code of ethics, we believe all that stuff. And I don't disagree that they can do good deeds. We can find plenty of examples of atheists who are nice people. They're kind to their neighbors. They cook them a casserole when they're sick. You know, they do nice things for people that we would say, well, that's kind of a moral thing. That's a courteous or that's a nice thing to do. And so we recognize that. So we kind of have to draw the line here, what we're talking about, what we're not talking about. It's true, anybody can do nice things. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying here is there's no basis for that morality. What do you base that in? How do you describe good and evil in a way that's an objective moral standard? You can't do that if you're an atheist. What do you appeal to outside of yourself, your own opinion? To say it another way, they have no basis for that morality outside of their opinion. So ask your Christian, why is child abuse wrong? We can cite a number of passages, right? Starting with Love your neighbor, Matthew 22:39. There's a lot of reasons why child abuse is something that's wrong. We appeal to this universal, objective standard of morality that's outside of my own thinking. This is from God. And so it's objective and it's a universal standard. Ask an atheist the same question, why is child abuse wrong? What can they say? I believe it's wrong. Or we believe, a lot of us believe it's wrong. Okay, but why? It's not immoral for one lion to kill another lion. Why is it immoral for one human to murder another human? Why is there a difference between humans and animals? Different parts of what we find on this planet. Why is there that discrimination? You don't see lions forming a society and having this code and putting some of them themselves in jail, but humans do that. Why? Where does that sense of morality come from? You see the problem that atheists face. If we've just evolved and there's no such thing as God, there's no such thing as souls, there's no judgment day, there's none of that stuff, who's to say what's right and wrong? Or that there even is such a thing as right and wrong? That's a problem for atheism. Why is there a difference between humans who have this sense of morality that can't successfully be denied and everything else? Trees, lions, whatever else you want to look at on this planet. As atheist Richard Dawkins said about the universe, he said there is no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows or cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. He's very honest and consistent, at least in this point, that, yeah, you're right. There's no morality. This is just what it is, and we dance to the music of DNA. Back in the book of Proverbs, chapter 30, that kind of attitude reminds me of this verse over here. Proverbs 30 and verse 20. It's kind of a random verse here to read in the middle of the sermon, but it's the same attitude. This is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done no wrong. That's the idea there. Here's somebody not living by God's standards of morality, but she just wipes her mouth. Oh, who cares? What difference does it make? It's that kind of idea. If we've just evolved, then what difference does it make? There's no standard of right and wrong. And so atheists find themselves in the unenviable position of either trying to explain how morality arose naturally, what's the purpose of that, how did it come about, or denying this universal objective morality. Listen to this quote. James Rachel, this is from his book, Created from Animals, The Moral Implications of Darwinism. I'll put it up. It's not a typo. This is what he really wrote. And this is what he said about mentally disabled people. He said, their status is that of mere animals. And perhaps we should go on to conclude that they may be used as non-human animals are used, perhaps as laboratory subjects or as food. That's what he wrote. You see where this philosophy leads you? If you're going to be intellectually consistent, this is the sort of thing you'll end up saying. We can't successfully argue that there really is such a thing as good or evil. What about the Holocaust? You got Hitler murdering millions of Jews and others. Was that wrong? And atheists have a hard time explaining that in a way that would be acceptable to any audience, at least. An atheist has no objective standard for saying that that was wrong. It can be your opinion that what Hitler did was wrong. Could be a lot of people's opinions that what Hitler did was wrong, but that's as far as you can go if there's no God. David Silverman, who was the president of American Atheists, was forced to admit that. He was in a debate. He was pressed repeatedly about the Holocaust. How do you know that's wrong? How could you say that's wrong? You don't really believe in right and wrong. So what's the deal? He's pressed and he's pressed and he's pressed. Here's what he finally had to admit. He said, the hard answer is you're correct. The hard answer it is it is a matter of opinion. Think about what he's saying. He said when you really get down to it, Hitler had his opinion and you have your opinion. And that's all there is. Neither opinion is right or wrong. It's just opinion. There's no basis for morality. Here's the truth. God is the source of our moral standards. Submit, therefore, to God. James 4:7. Your word is truth, Jesus said, John 17:17. You adopt these philosophies that may seem appealing in some sense. This is inevitably where it leads. Let's be careful. Third thing I want to talk about this morning, eternity is our goal. Look in Romans chapter 1 again, please. Romans chapter 1. Remember that humanism, since it denies the existence of God, also denies the existence of any kind of eternal heaven or hell. And they look at that as a liberating thing. You know, there's no judgment day. You don't have to be worried. You don't have to live your life in fear that some God out there is going to send you to hell if you don't behave like he wants you to behave. And they use that in their writing as it's a liberating thing. You don't have to worry about that sort of thing anymore. Romans chapter 1, verse 28. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer. By the way, that's humanism, right? They did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer. And then verse 28 keeps going. God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. So God lets us make our own choices. He's given us a free will. Even if we make the wrong choice, if we make the choice to rebel against him and reject him and his truth and deny that he even exists, he said, okay, you can do that. That's your free choice to make, and I'll let you do that. Look in verse 32. After listing all these bad things, you see verse 29, 30, 31. Then in verse 32 he says, and although they know the